Hello everyone, and welcome to ASMR Crime Chronicles. My name is Lydia, and tonight we'll be taking a calm, thoughtful look at another fascinating true crime mystery. Before we begin, I'd like to remind everyone that the cases discussed on this channel involve real people and real families. The purpose of these videos is not to sensationalize tragedy, but to explore the facts, the investigations, and the unanswered questions that continue to surround these stories. So, get comfortable, settle in, and let's begin. Most people grow up knowing who they are. They know where they came from. They know the names of their parents, and they rarely question the stories they've been told about their childhood. But for Frances Pat Mealbach, those questions would linger for most of her life. The mystery began with a discovery, a revelation hidden within family records. A revelation that suggested the people she had always believed were her parents were not her biological family at all. For many people, such a discovery would be shocking enough. But for Pat, it was only the beginning. As she searched for answers, she uncovered fragments of a story that seemed almost impossible to believe. Memories from childhood, a photograph of 2 infants, a grand mansion she remembered visiting as a young girl, and clues that appeared to connect her to one of the wealthiest and most famous families in American history, the Dodge family. For decades, Pat searched for the truth, not for money, not for inheritance, but for something far more personal: identity. Who was she? Where had she come from? And why did so many of the answers seem hidden behind secrecy and silence? Tonight, we'll explore the remarkable story of Pat Mealbach, a woman whose lifelong search for her family became one of the most unusual and emotional mysteries ever featured on Unsolved Mysteries. For most of her life, Pat Mealbach believed she knew her family history. She had grown up in Michigan. She knew the people she called her parents. And like most children, she accepted the story of her life without question. There seemed little reason not to. But everything changed after the death of her father. As family matters were being settled, Pat encountered information that would alter her understanding of her own identity. Buried within the records was evidence suggesting that she had been adopted. The revelation came as a shock, not because adoption itself was unusual, but because no one had ever told her. For years, she had lived without knowing one of the most important facts about her own life. Naturally, questions followed. Who were her biological parents? Why had she been adopted? And why had the truth remained hidden for so long? At first, Pat simply wanted answers. Many adoptees experience a desire to learn more about their origins, to understand where they came from, to fill in missing pieces of their personal history. Pat's search began in much the same way. She examined records, spoke with relatives, and searched for any information that might explain the circumstances of her birth. But almost immediately, she encountered obstacles. Information was missing. Records appeared incomplete. And some of the answers she received seemed contradictory. Instead of solving the mystery, each discovery seemed to create new questions. Yet one thing remained constant. Pat was determined. She wasn't interested in wealth. She wasn't seeking publicity. She simply wanted the truth. The more she searched, however, the stranger the story became. Because alongside the records and documents, Pat carried something else, a memory from childhood that she had never forgotten. A memory involving an enormous mansion, and years later, that memory would lead her toward a possibility that seemed almost unbelievable. A possibility involving one of America's most famous families, the Dodge family. As Pat Mealbach continued searching for answers about her origins, she found herself returning to a memory from childhood. It wasn't a document, or a photograph, or even a story someone had told her. It was a place she remembered visiting when she was very young. For years, the memory remained vivid. Pat recalled being taken to an enormous mansion. The home seemed unlike anything she had ever seen before. It was elegant, grand, and intimidating in a way that only truly large estates can be. She remembered sweeping staircases, expansive rooms, and the feeling that the house belonged to people of extraordinary wealth. As a child, she didn't understand the significance of the visit. It was simply a memory, one among many. But as an adult searching for clues about her past, the memory took on new importance. Pat began asking herself a simple question. Why would she have been taken there? And more importantly, whose mansion had it been? Over time, she became convinced that the home she remembered was located on Boston Boulevard in Detroit. The area was known for its impressive residences. Many of them belonged to some of the most prominent families in Michigan history. As Pat researched the neighborhood, she found herself drawn to one family in particular, the Dodge family. The Dodges had built an automotive empire. Their name was recognized throughout the country, and their wealth had produced some of the grandest homes in Detroit. As Pat compared photographs of the estates to the images she carried in her memory, she became increasingly convinced she had found a connection. Could the mansion she remembered have belonged to the Dodge family? It was an extraordinary possibility, perhaps too extraordinary. Yet the more she investigated, the more questions emerged. There were stories, rumors, and fragments of information suggesting that something unusual may have occurred decades earlier. Pat also became aware of a photograph that would further deepen the mystery. The image appeared to show two infants, and according to some interpretations, it raised the possibility that one child might have been raised separately from the other. To Pat, the photograph seemed important. Another clue, another piece of a puzzle she had spent years trying to solve. Still, none of it amounted to proof. Memories can be imperfect, photographs can be misunderstood, and family stories often change over time. Yet Pat remained convinced that the answers to her origins might lie somewhere within the history of the Dodge family. The possibility was both exciting and frustrating, because every apparent clue seemed to lead to another unanswered question, and the closer she felt to the truth, the more difficult it became to separate fact from speculation. What Pat needed was evidence, official records, documents, something concrete that could either confirm or disprove the theory she had spent years pursuing. Unfortunately, obtaining those records would prove far more difficult than she imagined, because the next stage of her search would lead from family memories to courtrooms, and from personal curiosity to a legal battle over information that some people seemed determined to keep hidden. As Pat Mealbach continued investigating her past, she found herself increasingly drawn toward a possibility that many people would have dismissed immediately, the possibility that she was connected to the Dodge family. It was an extraordinary claim. After all, the Dodge name was woven into American history. Founded by brothers John and Horace Dodge, The company had helped transform Detroit into the center of the automotive industry. The family accumulated immense wealth. Their influence stretched throughout Michigan and beyond, and over the decades, countless stories had emerged surrounding the family's private lives. For Pat, however, this wasn't about wealth or prestige. It was about understanding where she came from. As she researched the Dodge family, she began noticing details that seemed to align with the fragments of information she had uncovered during her search. There was the mansion she remembered from childhood. There were stories surrounding members of the family, and there was a photograph that continued to capture her attention. The image appeared to show two infants. To Pat, the photograph raised a troubling possibility. Could she have been separated from a sibling? Could one child have remained with a wealthy family while another had been placed elsewhere? The photograph alone could not answer those questions, but it fueled her determination to keep searching. As years passed, Pat spoke with historians, relatives, and individuals familiar with the Dodge family history. Some people were sympathetic, others were skeptical. Many simply weren't sure what to believe. The challenge was that much of the evidence remained circumstantial. Memories, stories, photographs. None of it provided definitive proof, yet neither did it completely eliminate the possibility. And so, the mystery continued. Pat found herself caught between two competing realities. On one hand, there was no conclusive evidence proving she belonged to the Dodge family. On the other hand, there seemed to be just enough unanswered questions to prevent the theory from disappearing entirely. For many people, the uncertainty might have been enough to walk away. But Pat had already spent years searching, and the deeper she looked, the more convinced she became that official records held the answer she needed. Somewhere, she believed, documents existed that could finally reveal the truth. Birth records, adoption records, court records, information capable of confirming her identity once and for all. The problem was gaining access to those records, because many remained sealed, protected by laws designed to preserve privacy. As a result, Pat found herself facing a difficult decision. If the answers weren't going to come voluntarily, she would have to fight for them, and that fight would eventually take her into court, where her search for identity would become a public battle over information that had remained hidden for decades. By the time Pat Mealbach had spent years researching her origins, she had become convinced that the answer she sought existed somewhere within official records. The problem was finding them. Many adoption records were sealed. Birth records could be restricted, and laws designed to protect privacy often made it difficult for adoptees to access information about their biological families. Pat understood these challenges, but she also believed that her circumstances were unusual. The questions surrounding her birth had not been answered through traditional research. If anything, each discovery seemed to raise additional questions. Memories suggested one possibility, documents suggested another, and the more she investigated, the more she felt that important information remained hidden. As a result, Pat turned to the legal system. She sought access to records that she believed might finally reveal the truth about her origins. For Pat, the issue wasn't financial. Throughout her search, she repeatedly stated that she wasn't seeking wealth, inheritance, or recognition. She wanted answers. She wanted certainty. She wanted to know who her biological parents were and whether the stories she had uncovered contained any truth. The legal battle attracted attention, partly because of the unusual nature of the claims, and partly because of the possibility that one of America's most famous families might somehow be connected to the story. Yet courtrooms operate on evidence, not memories, not rumors, not possibilities, evidence, and that created a challenge. Pat possessed compelling questions, but questions are not proof. As proceedings unfolded, attorneys, judges, and researchers examined the available information. Records were reviewed, arguments were presented, and yet many of the same obstacles remained. Some records were incomplete, others were unavailable, and some questions simply could not be answered with the information that existed. For Pat, the experience was both hopeful and frustrating. Hopeful because she had finally gained an opportunity to pursue the truth through official channels. Frustrating because even the legal system could not easily resolve decades of uncertainty. Still, she refused to abandon her search because after spending so many years looking for answers, walking away was no longer an option. The mystery had become part of her life, part of her identity, and whether the outcome confirmed her suspicions or disproved them entirely, she wanted the truth. Yet as the years passed, a difficult reality emerged. The answer she sought might not be found in court. It might not be found in photographs or family stories or even sealed records. Instead, it might require something that did not yet exist when her search began. A technology capable of revealing family connections through science itself. And although Pat would spend much of her life searching for answers, developments that occurred later would raise new questions about whether the truth had finally been uncovered. For much of her life, Pat Mealbach searched for answers. She searched through family stories, through photographs, through legal records, and through memories that had remained with her since childhood. The search became a defining part of her life, not because she sought fame, not because she sought wealth, but because she wanted to understand her own origins. Who were her biological parents? Why had she been adopted? And was there any truth behind the clues that appeared to connect her to the Dodge family? These questions followed her for decades, and despite years of investigation, certainty often remained frustratingly out of reach. Some records appeared incomplete. Some information remained sealed, and many of the people who might have possessed first-hand knowledge were no longer alive. As a result, the mystery endured. To some observers, the evidence seemed compelling. To others, it remained largely circumstantial. Reasonable people reached different conclusions, and for many years, the questions persisted. Yet, as the 20th century gave way to the 21st, something changed. A new tool emerged, one that hadn't been available during the earliest years of Pat's search. DNA testing. For the first time in history, individuals searching for their family origins could compare genetic information directly. Relationships that once depended upon paperwork and memories could now be examined scientifically. For adoptees and genealogists, the technology was revolutionary, and it offered possibilities that earlier generations could scarcely imagine. In the years that followed, family researchers continued examining Pat's story. New information emerged. Additional genealogical work was performed, and various individuals connected to the case offered their own interpretations of the evidence. Some believed that the newer information supported Pat's long-held suspicions, others remained cautious. As with many historical mysteries, not everyone agreed on what the evidence ultimately proved. Yet one thing remained undeniable. Pat's determination had ensured that the questions would not simply disappear. Her search inspired researchers, family historians, and others who understood the importance of identity and belonging. Even after her passing, people continued examining the mystery she had spent so many years trying to solve. And perhaps that is the most enduring part of her story. Not whether every question was answered, not whether every mystery was resolved, but the simple human desire to know where we come from, to understand our place in the world, and to seek the truth, even when that truth remains difficult to reach. Today, Pat Mealbach's story continues to fascinate those who encounter it, because at its heart, it is not merely a mystery, it is a story about identity, about family, and about a woman who spent her life searching for answers that many people take for granted. Whether every question was ultimately resolved may still be debated, but her determination to pursue the truth remains impossible to ignore, and for that reason, her story continues to be remembered. Thank you for joining me for this episode of ASMR Crime Chronicles. As always, I like to remind everyone that the stories we discuss involve real people and real families, and they deserve to be remembered with dignity and respect. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider liking, subscribing, and returning for future cases as we continue to explore mysteries, disappearances, and the investigations that surround them. Until next time, thank you for listening, and good night.